I first heard this story at a drinking party at work. He and I had joined the company the same year, and we often went out for drinks and talked about personal matters. At first, he told it to me as a joke, but gradually it began to seem like the truth. The man on the train, a chain reaction caused by a tragedy 5 years ago. It all started in September 2018 with an incident involving his junior colleague, Hinata. Hinata started seeing a creepy man on the train he rides every day. The man always sits in the same seat at the same time on the same train, and as if unaware of the presence around him, he stares at a newspaper from 5 years ago without changing his expression. At first, Hinata thought the man was just a strange presence. However, the sense of incongruity gradually grew, and he began to consult Hinata at work. Kazuki, being curious, became interested in Hinata's story and decided to ride the train himself. When Kazuki saw the man for the first time, he felt something strange. A man of unknown age was sitting on the seat. Hinata mentioned reading a newspaper from 5 years ago. Kazuki told me about the eeriness he felt at that time. I don't know how to describe it, but I had the feeling that he was something special. His expression was like a doll, and he looked completely different from the people around him. Since then, Kazuki became interested in the man's behavior and finally decided to follow him. He followed the man several times, but he always got on the same train and got off at the same station. The man went to an old house. When he stood in front of the house, Kazuki felt a shiver run down his spine. There was a faint light coming from the windows of the house, but according to the neighbors, no one had lived there for years. Gradually, Kazuki began to doubt the man's true identity. No matter how he thought about it, it was not normal. A few weeks later, Kazuki received another call from Hinata. The voice on the phone was a bit more restless than usual. "That man has reappeared," Hinata said. At first, it was just a creepy man he'd seen on the commuter train. But when he noticed that Hinata was on the same train at the same time and in the same seat again, he began to feel that something was not normal. Kazuki took Hinata's story seriously as well. In the previous investigation, the man's behavior was certainly creepy, but there was nothing particularly unusual about it. This time, however, the situation was different. This time, he's not just sitting there. He's staring at me, Hinata said, and there was obvious fear in his eyes. Kazuki didn't know if this was just a coincidence or if he was acting with malicious intent. A few days later, Kazuki and Hinata boarded the same train again to check on the man. It was the usual rush hour and the train was crowded, but the man was sitting in his usual seat. He looked the same as the last time, age unknown, expressionless and staring straight ahead. This time, however, he shifted his gaze from time to time, and Kazuki and Hinata noticed that he was definitely looking at them. "Do you feel anything?" Hinata asked in a quiet voice. Kazuki noticed the gaze as well but couldn't find anything conclusively unusual. But the atmosphere there was definitely strange. The swaying of the train and the commotion of the surrounding passengers had disappeared, and only the presence of the man remained strong in Kazuki's and the others' consciousness. It was as if time had stopped on the train, and the man was the only one who dominated the room. On this day, Kazuki and Hinata decided to follow the man. Just like last time, the man got off the train at the same station and walked towards the old house. But this time, something was different. A vague shadow seemed to float around the house, and Kazuki felt an eerie chill. The faint light from the window was the same as last time, but the light felt more unnatural. Is there really no one living in this house? A question crossed Kazuki's mind. Arriving in front of the house, Hinata said with a trembling voice, "I'm more afraid to come closer than before." Kazuki felt the same, but his curiosity overcame his fear. What was going on in the house? Who was that man? And why did he seem to be related to Hinata? Kazuki couldn't help but solve this mystery. At Hinata's urging, he avoided entering the house that day. But something was definitely changing inside Kazuki. Gradually, he began to take a strong interest in the man's behavior and began to worry that this strange event was somehow affecting him as well. The events that Hinata experienced during his college years are deeply engraved in his life. It started several years ago when he was still a student. One night, Hinata was on a late-night train after a drinking party with friends. That day, while he was drunk and daydreaming, a stranger sat in front of him. He had no expression on his face and seemed somewhat unreal. He told himself it was all in his head and ignored him at the time, paying no particular attention to him. However, the man appeared in front of Hinata many times. He would sit in the same seat at the same time on the same train. Each time, he just stared at Hinata without saying anything. Although he felt something strange, Hinata thought it was just a coincidence. However, one night, the man acted strangely. That night, Hinata found the man again on the train and suddenly felt his gaze. His gaze was sharp, and it felt as if he was looking into his heart. Shaken, Hinata was unable to look away from his gaze. After a moment of silence, the man suddenly stood up, stepped in front of Hinata and said, "Do you know?" Hinata froze at the words. Not knowing what he knew or what it meant, he just remained silent. The man said nothing more and left the train at the next station. Hinata couldn't follow him right away, but those words remained in the depths of his heart and never faded away. Since then, Hinata couldn't help but wonder about that man. During university classes and in everyday life, the scene of that night would suddenly come to his mind, and he couldn't help but wonder what that man was trying to say and what he knew. One day, while talking with his friends, he found out that some of them had had similar experiences. The rumored creepy man had only appeared in front of certain students and said something meaningful. After that, no one knew what the man was trying to do. And then the rumor was gradually forgotten. But Hinata was different. For him, the existence of that man remained a mystery and affected his life afterwards. And this time, when he met that man again with Kazuki, the events of his university days came back to him all at once. Why did that man reappear? To find the answer, he had no choice but to go back in time. And then Hinata confessed everything to Kazuki. That man has been appearing before me since our college days. At that moment, Kazuki was convinced that this incident was no mere coincidence, and the two of them decided to solve the mystery once again. Kazuki decides to investigate the house he once passed. Something is lurking in the house. Convinced that it is not just a ruin, Kazuki decides to go there again with Hinata. This time, I will find out the true identity of this house. Kazuki vows and enters the house again with a flashlight in his hand. The darkness of the night becomes even more eerie, and the house is surrounded by an eerie silence. As he opens the door, something he missed last time jumps out at him. A yellowed newspaper is spread carelessly on the floor. This is a newspaper from 5 years ago, Hinata mumbles. The newspaper is dated exactly 5 years ago. What is strange is that a scribbled note was left on the edge of the newspaper. Among the letters that have been erased several times, one name stands out. Maida Senpai? He never expected the name of the senior who helped him during his college days to appear here. Next to it was Maida Senpai's address. As if guided, the next subject of investigation was decided. But at that moment, an unnatural sound echoed throughout the house. The sound echoed behind them, and Kazuki and Hinata's hearts seemed to stop for a moment. They instinctively looked at each other, fear in their eyes. Sensing someone's presence in the hallway, Hinata shouted out of breath, "I can't stay here any longer." Kazuki nodded silently and hurried to the exit of the house. The doorknob was cold to the touch, but the door opened immediately. The fresh air from outside enveloped the two of them, and they were overwhelmed by the realization that they had finally reached a safe place. What should we do? Is there anything in this house? Kazuki said, holding his breath. Hinata felt the same eeriness as well. Let's go back for now. And we have to investigate Maida Senpai. I feel like there might be a connection. And with that, the two of them quietly left the house. The next clue was the name and address of Maida Senpai in the newspaper. Kazuki started to contact everyone who knew Maida Senpai. He desperately wanted to know the truth about this mysterious incident. Finally, he was able to contact Sato, a friend from college. On the phone, Sato was reluctant to talk about Maida Senpai, but gradually he began to talk. Maida Senpai, he's not here anymore. E? What do you mean? Kazuki gasped. According to Sato, Maida Senpai died in a suspicious fire some years ago. The fire remains unsolved. Maida Senpai, you were really caring back then, too, and you often took me out drinking. Hinata spoke with a nostalgic tone, but Kazuki felt that something was wrong with his words. 5 years ago, for some reason he couldn't help but feel that this year held the key to everything. The fire 5 years ago and the death of Maida Senpai. Kazuki stared at the date in his notebook. Convinced that some important event was hidden in that year, he decided to investigate further. Kazuki continued his investigation, obsessed with the cause of Maida Senpai's death and the identity of the man on the train. He couldn't face the reality that he would soon be fired. Due to his continued unauthorized absences, the reality in front of him was too uncertain, and the only thing he could be sure of was that the man knew something or played an important role. Meanwhile, Hinata was always aware of the man's presence on the train, and was afraid of his gaze wherever he went. As the sleepless nights continued, Hinata's mind became sicker and sicker, and he was unable to do anything. Finally, Hinata decided to undergo an exorcism at a shrine. Encouraged by his friends and family around him, Hinata continued to search for a way out of this strange state. After receiving the exorcism at the shrine, Hinata's heart felt a little lighter. But it didn't last long. the creepy gaze he always felt from behind. And the figure of the man on the train still did not go away. On the contrary, Hinata's mental state worsened, and he could no longer distinguish between hallucinations and reality. Hinata had become withdrawn and was afraid to go out. Meanwhile, when Kazuki heard that Hinata had been purified at the shrine, he suddenly remembered a memory from 5 years ago. Maida Senpai had once invited Kazuki and Hinata to go to a purification ceremony. Back then, Kazuki hadn't paid much attention to the suggestion and had laughed it off as unscientific. Now, however, he began to think deeply about the meaning of those words. Why had Maida Senpai invited Kazuki to a purification ceremony? Was he afraid of something? Kazuki wondered if Maida Senpai had gone to the shrine alone, so he visited a local shrine to check. There he met the person who had performed an exorcism on Maida Senpai 5 years ago. The person told him that Maida Senpai had said, "Someone may have died because of me." Kazuki was convinced by these words that there was a connection to a certain fire accident. While looking through a newspaper from 5 years ago, he found an article about a house that burned down and killed a woman and her child. At the time, the husband was out working overtime. The cause of the fire was said to be a cigarette scattered among old newspapers piled up in the yard, which ignited. Kazuki remembered that Maida Senpai often walked around smoking after drinking alcohol. His former colleague couldn't get Kazuki's words, "I have no choice but to burn the house down," out of his head, and was worried about his action. Worried that Maida Senpai's words had been put into action, he saw information about fires spreading rapidly on social media, such as "the neighborhood is on fire." Could Kazuki really have started the fire? With this thought in his mind, he was shocked and looked at the pictures and videos of the fire on social media. There were many photos of the burning house and people walking into the flames on social media. At that moment, a heavy foreboding ran through the former colleague's heart, and his body froze. The next morning, the internet news reported that the house had been empty for 3 years, and that 2 bodies had been found in the burnt ruins. But things took an even more sinister turn. 2 weeks later, the bodies were found to be those of Hinata and Kazuki. Upon hearing the news, the former colleague's mind went blank. Why and how had the two entered the empty house? And what had driven them to their deaths? He couldn't understand it, and began to suspect a connection to the events of 5 years ago. The questions keep coming. Is the man who appeared on the train really the ghost of a husband who cannot rest in peace, in despair? The man who lost his wife and child hangs himself in the cellar of an empty house. And that house was the scene of a fire, the last place Hinata and Kazuki were. What did Kazuki and Hinata see and feel in that house? How was the fear and anxiety they felt related to the fire at Maida Senpai's house? And why did the man on the train keep appearing in front of them? Mystery after mystery arises in the minds of the former colleagues, but the answers remain shrouded in fog. It sends shivers down your spine. Is it a coincidence, or is it another kind of karma from 5 years ago? And what did Kazuki mean when he said, "I have no choice but to burn down the house"? Will the mystery of his death be solved, or will it disappear forever? Maybe no one in this world knows the answer. Thank you for watching.